the body transporter who killed the father of her children. On the morning of October 3rd, 2020, 4 children were waiting for a weekend they had been looking forward to all week. They were supposed to spend time with their father, a father who never showed up. At first, it seemed like a misunderstanding. Maybe he overslept. Maybe he had forgotten. Maybe his phone battery had died. But as the hours turned into days, something became impossible to ignore. Gregory Rice had vanished. His wallet was still inside his apartment. His vehicle was parked outside. His keys had been left behind. Only 2 things were missing: Greg Rice and his phone. What investigators would eventually uncover was a story involving a secret affair, a deputy coroner, a woman whose job was transporting dead bodies, and a murder that prosecutors would later describe as a carefully planned conspiracy. This is the case of Gregory Rice and the woman who helped transport the dead before becoming responsible for one. Gregory Vincent Rice was 46 years old. Friends described him as outgoing, dependable, and devoted to his children. He enjoyed surfing, golfing, comic books, and spending time outdoors. Most importantly, he lived for his 4 children. For nearly 15 years, Greg had been in a relationship with Meagan Jackson. The couple had moved from Ohio to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, hoping for a fresh start. Instead, everything began falling apart. The relationship deteriorated. Arguments became more frequent. Eventually, the couple separated. Meagan remained in the family home with the children. Greg moved into an apartment nearby. The custody arrangement was simple. The children stayed with Meagan during the week and spent weekends with Greg. Despite the breakup, Greg remained heavily involved in his children's lives. That was why his disappearance immediately alarmed everyone who knew him, especially when he failed to pick up his children. According to family members and friends, that was something Greg simply would not do. The night before he disappeared, everything seemed normal. Greg had worked his regular shift. Friends spoke with him. Meagan herself exchanged messages and phone calls with him. Plans for the weekend were confirmed. Nothing suggested danger. Nothing suggested he was about to vanish forever. When Greg failed to answer calls the following day, concern quickly spread. After several days with no contact, he was officially reported missing. Investigators entered Greg's apartment. Inside, they found no evidence suggesting he had voluntarily disappeared. His wallet was there. His vehicle was there. His personal belongings were untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of preparation, no indication that he had packed up and left. The only major item missing was his cell phone. As detectives interviewed people close to Greg, they began hearing something interesting. Several friends said Greg had recently expressed concerns about Meagan. Some claimed he believed she was capable of harming him. One friend later recalled Greg saying that if anything happened to him, investigators should look at Meagan. That statement would become difficult to ignore, because detectives soon learned that Meagan had a secret. Actually, more than one. By 2020, Meagan Jackson was working in a profession most people never think about. She transported human remains. Her job involved moving deceased individuals between locations such as medical examiner offices, funeral homes, airports, and morgues. Through that work, she became close to a deputy coroner named Christopher Dontell. The friendship soon became something more. The two began having an affair. According to later testimony, the relationship had become serious. Serious enough that it was creating major problems, especially because Christopher was married, and Greg had apparently learned about the affair. Investigators uncovered messages suggesting Greg knew far more than Meagan wanted him to know. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous for her secret relationship. Detectives then examined cell phone records. What they discovered changed the investigation. On the night Greg disappeared, cell phone data placed Meagan and Christopher together. Their movements attracted immediate attention. Investigators believed the pair traveled to Greg's location, despite later statements suggesting otherwise. Phone records, location data, and surveillance footage began painting a very different picture than the one they had provided. The evidence suggested they were not simply spending a quiet evening together. Something else had happened. Something far more serious. Then investigators made another discovery. Greg's phone had traveled after he disappeared. The device moved through areas connected to Meagan's route that night. Eventually, the phone went silent. Forever. As detectives reconstructed the timeline, suspicion continued growing. But they still had one major problem. They did not have Greg. Without a body, proving murder would be much more difficult. Then, more than a month later, everything changed. On November 7th, 2020, fishermen near the Little Pee Dee River made a horrifying discovery. Floating in the water was what appeared to be a large object wrapped in a tarp. As they moved closer, they realized it was not debris. It was a human body. Authorities responded immediately. The remains were identified as Gregory Rice, Investigators found that the body had been wrapped and weighed down with concrete blocks and other materials in an apparent effort to keep it submerged. The attempt had failed. Natural decomposition gases eventually brought the body back to the surface. The autopsy revealed the truth. Greg had been shot multiple times. The manner of death was homicide. The missing person case had officially become a murder investigation. Now detectives had a victim, and they needed a killer. The breakthrough came from physical evidence. Investigators traced materials connected to the disposal of the body. Surveillance footage and purchase records reportedly linked Christopher Dontell to items used during the crime. Cell phone evidence continued placing key individuals in critical locations. The case against Meagan and Christopher became stronger with every passing week. Then came the arrests. Both Meagan Jackson and Christopher Dontell were charged. Authorities allege that the pair had worked together in the murder and disposal of Gregory Rice. The story that emerged was disturbing. According to prosecutors, Meagan wanted Greg gone. The relationship was over. The affair was ongoing. And Greg represented a threat to the future she wanted. Investigators also uncovered allegations involving Meagan's treatment of her children. During searches of her home, authorities found unusual locking mechanisms on bedroom doors and other areas of the house. The discoveries generated additional scrutiny and public outrage. But the central focus remained the murder of Greg Rice. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors continued assembling evidence. Then Christopher Dontell made a decision that changed everything. Rather than proceed to trial alongside Meagan, he reached an agreement with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to charges connected to the crime. In exchange, he agreed to testify. His testimony would become one of the most important pieces of evidence presented against Meagan Jackson. Christopher told jurors that Meagan was the shooter. He described a sequence of events in which Greg was confronted and killed. He then admitted participating in the efforts to conceal the crime afterward. Defense attorneys attacked his credibility. After all, he had every reason to minimize his own responsibility. But prosecutors argued that his testimony was supported by independent evidence: cell phone records, surveillance footage, purchase records, travel patterns, and forensic findings. Together, they created a picture the prosecution believed was impossible to ignore. The trial became a battle over credibility. Who was telling the truth? Who was lying? And who was trying to save themselves? Jurors spent days reviewing the evidence. They heard about the affair. They heard about the movements of the phones. They heard about Greg's disappearance. And they heard about the discovery of his body in the river. When deliberations ended, the jury reached its decision. Meagan Jackson was found guilty. The verdict covered the murder of Gregory Rice and related charges connected to the crime. For Greg's family, the decision brought a measure of justice. But it could never bring Greg back. At sentencing, Meagan Jackson received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christopher Dontell, who had already accepted responsibility through his plea agreement, received a lengthy prison sentence of his own. The case was over, at least legally, but the story remains difficult to forget because of the contradiction at its center. A woman whose professional life revolved around transporting the dead. A woman who understood exactly how bodies were handled, how investigations worked, how evidence was collected, how deaths were examined. Prosecutors argued that knowledge did not prevent a murder. Instead, it became part of the story. In the end, Gregory Rice was not found by sophisticated technology. He was not discovered through a confession. He was found because a body hidden in a river refused to stay hidden. And once investigators began following the trail backward, the evidence eventually led them to the people closest to him. A father disappeared before he could see his children. A secret affair became a homicide investigation. And a woman who transported the dead spent the rest of her life becoming one of the most infamous murder defendants in South Carolina history. For Gregory Rice's family, the case will never be remembered for the affair, the trial, or the headlines. It will be remembered for a father who never arrived for the weekend visit, and for 4 children who waited for someone who was never coming home.